Welcome into an emergency edition of the 5 Reasons podcast. I don't believe we have done one of these since the Miami Heat traded for Dwayne Wade. But we have another trade to talk about, but it surrounds the Miami Dolphins, and it is the end of an era. Ryan Tannehill has finally been traded from the Miami Dolphins to the Tennessee Titans in exchange for a fourth-round pick in 2020 and some 6s and some 7s moving in various directions as well. But mainly, that is the gist of the trade. And Ethan, I'll just kind of start here with my vantage point on this, and I just tweeted this, that you look at the Ryan Tannehill era, 6 years, 10 months, and 17 days since he was drafted, and it feels even longer than that. It feels like this has just sort of been a dark cloud hanging over the franchise for a long time, and that's harsh on Ryan Tannehill, and I think we should talk about that in this podcast, that I think the treatment of Tannehill in general has been harsh, mainly because I think when a franchise quarterback is expected and one is not delivered, that quarterback is going to feel the brunt of it from the fan base. But at the same time, I still think he's a capable NFL quarterback that I think will get work at another point in his career, but it just wasn't going to work here when the fans were expecting a franchise quarterback, and he's just not that. What was your initial reaction when you saw that Ryan Tannehill was traded?
Well, I think, look, at long last, I think Dolphin fans can kind of just move out of that headspace, right? This has been – again, this is nothing against Ryan Tannehill, and his toughness is to be admired, and that's what I tweeted. That's the first thing that comes to mind. He's a tough guy, and he played through a lot of issues early in his career that were caused by horrible offensive lines, play callers that kept changing, schemes that kept changing, not really elite guys on the outside, all kinds of different issues. And look, plenty of excuses were made for him during that period of time. But he played through, 60 sacks a season for a little while, right? And he never got hurt. He always played. And then he gets hurt. And at the time where he was playing his best, I don't know what his upside would have looked like. I don't know if it would have been top 12. I don't believe it probably would have been, although some of his metrics in the last few games before the knee injury in 16 were kind of indicating that was a possibility. But the reality is when he came back from the injury, he was just too limited. And so what started to happen was a lot of his issues that we'd seen before got magnified, right? And then he couldn't do some of the other things that gave him a chance, like get out of the pocket, make some plays that way, and run those boots and all that other kind of stuff. So, but what I tweeted today, Chris, was I don't think there's been an athlete in South Florida history that's been talked about more, but really has less of a mark on South Florida. Those two things, what is Ryan Tannehill's mark on South Florida other than keeping time at that position, right? Okay, he had one streak where he completed a lot of passes in a row. There's a couple of games that come to mind where he had some comebacks, but for 7 years, man, 7 years and no playoff, victories. Maybe he would have gotten one possibly. I don't think so against the Steelers, after the 16 season if it had been him instead of Matt Moore, but I don't really believe that. So, it's funny. It's just 7 years, and if you and I know this may be a little unfair, but we do Dwayne Wade podcasts, and there's 7,000 memories you're sorting through. We'd have trouble getting to 10 with Tannehill, and right? Really, and we've been talking about him forever. So much wasted breath and conversation, and that's typically how these things work in sports. You debate, and then somebody just gets released or traded for a fourth-round pick, and So I guess to put a capper on the Tannehill era, it was sort of much ado about nothing, right? Right?
It's the worst thing that can happen too, because it's a first-round pick quarterback, and this is why first-round pick misses at the quarterback position are so devastating, because, like you said, you talk so much about it. You talk so much about, can this player be the player that fixes your problem at quarterback? And if he's not that, then it just sort of sets the passage of time back. You think about what's happened in the intervening 7 years. It's been a whole lot of nothing. They made one playoff game and they lost it, and he didn't even play in it, and that's it. And it's just such a giant, colossal waste of time, which for me gets back to the tanking thing, which is, okay, so you've just wasted 7 years on this quarterback that you know not to be good enough, and then people go, well, you can't waste a year because that's antithetical to the existence of a sports fan. Every year should carry some meaning. I'm going, well, the last 20 haven't meant anything. And so what is another year if it's towards the end product of finding one of these top of the draft quarterbacks that's actually going to create the change that Ryan Tannehill in theory offers as a top 10 pick quarterback?
But one leads to the other here, because the reason that some fans will be impatient about this is because they just did wait around for 7 years for something to happen, and nothing happened. And so, I mean, everything with Tannehill was about, it could be like the argument for him was always it could be worse with someone else, right? Like that's always been the argument. It's like, maybe he is not going to ever be great, but if you had somebody else in there, and then the Cutler experiment kind of proved that, right? So I think what happened there is that, Dolphin fans kept looking, or some of them checked down on Ryan a long time ago. I mean, but a lot of them were kind of looking for that breakthrough, and we thought we saw it a little bit in 2016. But again, I asked that question. So where was that going? Like, was he going to be top 10, top 12, consistently top 15? I'm not really sure. But I feel like what's happened here is it's like anything else in life. You have something in your life that's kind of okay, right? And you don't really want to take the risk of trying to get something that's better because you may end up with nothing. And I feel like that's how the Dolphins have operated. And I think the biggest black mark against the Dolphins and what they've done is not ever drafting any competition for their quarterbacks, and particularly these last 7 years with Tannehill. And so it's one thing to draft a guy in the first round, but it's another thing over the next few years to not draft anybody to compete with him and make sure you have the right guy. He got treatment that Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers have not gotten in terms of the quarterbacks being brought into, Green Bay or particularly New England over the past few years to either become assets or eventually maybe Brady's successor. The timing just didn't work out with Garoppolo, but you ended up getting a high pick for him. So I think that's the thing, is we're looking around at what the Dolphins are doing now. They're forced to pick a crappy quarterback by default now because they haven't had anybody waiting in the wings. How do you go 7 years? Okay, and Chris Greer is part of this organization. I mean, he's not totally exempt. I don't think he's totally responsible either, because of Tannenbaum and others, but he's not totally exempt. But how do you go through 7 years and not have when a guy is average or slightly above average, and not have anybody waiting in the wings? Like, where you and I are talking about the fact that you have bad quarterbacks, and so you want to play them so you lose more games. Like, how did that happen exactly? Because that can never happen in this organization again.
Yeah, and the amazing thing is that I was looking this up as you were talking, and the history of the Dolphins' first-round pick quarterbacks at the quarterback position since 1970, since the AFL-NFL merger, is two players, Dan Marino and Ryan Tannehill, and that's it. And
right,
and we're sitting around going, well, why has this organization had a problem with quarterbacks? They don't invest anything at quarterback. They pin all their hopes on one guy that they found, and if that doesn't work, we move on to the next guy. There is no broader plan. And yeah, I mean, and Omar Kelly pointed this out on Twitter. People saying that the quarterback depth chart as it stands is Jake Rudock and David Fales, and I think there's a real possibility that a rookie starts this year. Now, it might not be a first-round pick, but we need to see more youth at this position and a more constant cycling and future planning, like you said, for taking a third-round pick quarterback, a fourth-round pick quarterback. But because every regime has come in and said, well, we'll just, if we fix the linebacking situation, we're there. If we fix the secondary, we're there. And we're a playoff team, we're competing, and that's certainly the mode in which Adam Gase operated, and Nick Saban and Parcells. No one really has taken a step back and looked at that position and gone, what is our plan for the long haul? Other than, obviously taking Ryan Tannehill in the first place, but that long-term planning is just not there, and that is the one thing that I will say it does appear that this new regime has, is long-term vision about what this position is going to be, because they are looking either at this draft or the following draft as their opportunity to fill this void, and I commend them for it. But I do want to ask you one question, which is, and this is funny to me because Ted Ginn was considered a failure of a pick because they picked him in the top 10, and he has had what I would say by any reasonable standard is an above-average career, even at the draft spot at which he was taken, even for a top 10 pick, right? Because a lot of top 10 picks fail, and a lot of 9th overall picks fail, and he's been in the league for more than 10 years, and he's had a role to play. He is an NFL player, just as I believe Ryan Tannehill is and he even exceeds expectations for the 8th overall pick. Again, that sounds crazy, but you look at, so here is, some players since the year 2000 that have been taken in the top 10 of the NFL draft at the quarterback position. Jamarcus Russell, David Carr, Sam Bradford, I guess Carson Palmer, I guess you can say, is decent enough. Alex Smith was taken number 1 overall, a good player. Robert Griffin III. You have Blake Bortles 3, Joey Harrington 3, Vince Young 3, Mark Sanchez 5, Byron Leftwich 7, Jake Locker 8, Blaine Gabbert 10, Matt Leinart 10. I mean, there is a lot of failure in the top 10 of the draft. And again, for me, the ultimate tombstone on this era was a decent player, right? An NFL starting quarterback. In my opinion, should be one of the 32 starters in the league based off of talent, and yet he is not the guy you would want leading your organization. And that is kind of the tombstone, not just on Tannehill's era with the Dolphins, but for me, what it's going to end up being at the end of his career. He's the guy that, Cleveland goes and signs Tyrod Taylor last year in the hopes that Baker Mayfield will displace him, and he did. That is Ryan Tannehill's future for me, is he is a starter, but never the starter you'd want to have on your team.
Well, because the intangibles were never there. Right. So, it was always a joke about playing receiver, but there was something to it, because the quarterback position, those who played quarterback growing up, develop certain leadership skills. That's how they sort of elevate. And I'm not sure. I mean, Ryan had the toughness thing at the leadership by example, but some of the stuff that came out this week, and frankly, that I'd heard through the years, of other players on the team just not impressed by him. Right. Like, And the one thing you remember for him speaking out was him trashing practice squad players. Remember that? Like that?
Yeah.
And that's not to say he's a bad guy or anything like that. He did a lot of work for the community behind the scenes. I think he was cordial with the media. He never said anything interesting, except I guess there were a couple of occasions, but for the most part, over 7 years, he did not have more than a couple of memorable press conferences. And so I just think we were at a stage with him where you're just in an indefinite holding pattern. It's like the example I would set is like you basically landed the plane, right? But they won't bring it into the gate, So you're sitting there on the tarmac for 45 minutes, calling your family members as you're rescheduling Lyft rides and taxis, because they won't just bring you into the gate. Like, the Dolphins never brought this thing into the gate. It just sat there for 7 years, and with nothing else, like get a tow or something, or at the very least, just draft a quarterback in the 4th freaking round. I mean, just somebody like, not Brandon Doughty, okay? Somebody that's going to compete with him. But they treated him with kid gloves, all these regimes. And if you have to treat your quarterback with kid gloves, where you can't give him competition, right? Like, he's not the right guy then, because that position requires a certain confidence.
Isn't the moment in a game that encapsulates that the Colts game where they don't trust him to throw on 3rd down?
Yes, that was the moment of Ryan Tannehill's Dolphin career to me. That was Adam Gase basically saying, I don't trust this guy. And look, I'm not saying Gase is perfect. You know my feelings about him. But I do think there were other things going on behind the scenes. I think now we can speak to it. Chris Kaufman, CK Parrott, and I had many conversations about sources he spoke to who said the Dolphins and Tannehill last year just did not, again, this is not the first time, they did not agree on the recovery process. Not that Ryan was shirking it, but that Ryan and his family, his wife, believe in this holistic stuff, and that there was constant conflict on that, and that played into some of what we saw last season. But look, I give Ryan credit for coming back. I give him credit for trying at the end of the season, but he was horrible. He was just really bad. I mean,
except for the Miami Miracle game.
Well, the Miami Miracle, yes, you're right, absolutely. The Miami Miracle game against New England, he was very, very good. You're right. Okay, even if you take out the last play, he was very good. But some of the other games, I mean, again, you mentioned the Indy game, that was atrocious. The Cincinnati game, a little bit earlier in the season, I know he was hurt in that game, so it might be a little bit unfair. But just so many of these games, I mean, the game against the Patriots, that was the sign early in the season. The one up there, that was the sign early in the season. All right, this is just not going to happen, right? Like, I mean, you were giving Ryan a little time. I think it was week 3. They were 2-0, and he goes up there and just played a horrible, horrible game. And so, could he show flashes? Yes. Do I agree with you that he can be a starter again? But, well, potentially one of the 32 best, I guess. I mean, certainly his numbers show it. But I don't think he becomes a starter again unless it is, sort of a hand-holding role for a rookie where he's a stopgap guy. He's going to become, Chad Henne, which is another sad story. I think he's a little better than Henne. And he's going to become Josh McCown, right? He's Ryan Fitzpatrick, right? The guy that you bring in, as you said, with the intention of replacing. And it's just when that is what you wasted your time on for 7 years, we won't revisit it much more after this, but it embodies what's been a very dull, sort of frustrating era of Dolphins football. I mean, even, the guy who gets criticized so much, and the numbers are not as good as Tannehill's, although the game was a little different. But Jay Fiedler had some leadership qualities that won over that room. Okay, like even they bring in an AJ Feely, trade draft picks for him, coming off 4-1 with Philadelphia. And the key players in those Dolphin teams, the Zach Thomases, the Sam Madison's, Pat Surtains, Jason Taylor, they went to bat for Jay, okay, because Jay had some of those qualities. Ryan, I don't know. It just never really materialized. He was very robotic, and then you would always hear stories, particularly from receivers who left the organization, of just not being the guy. Doesn't mean he can't be a guy somewhere, but he can't be the guy. And I think that's where the Dolphins got caught out.
All right, last one before we sign off here. Best guess, what it doesn't have to be a player or a name. What is the profile of the player that is starting opening day for the Dolphins in 2019?
Well, I think now it's going to be I think it's going to be one of these journeymen they have on the roster. Now, wow. It could be a third or fourth round pick, I guess. I mean, I don't see the risk in that. Again, if you have some compensatory picks, you got more to play with. So why not take a quarterback in the middle rounds and hope you find a Kirk Cousins type who becomes your guy when you weren't expecting it? And so, you give it a year. I know other teams have tried this and it's worked for them. And so maybe that. I just don't see who the veteran is. I mean, are they really going to bring in Blake Bortles? I mean, what is the message that's sending? He's worse than Tannehill, right? I mean, so
that might be the point,
doing?
though.
Right, but that's such a horrible point. Like, if you're going to do that, then just start.
Yeah. It's to start an unknown, right? Start an unknown. That's more interesting.
Right. I mean, right. It's more interesting.
And has more potential.
How are you going to sell? Right, like Teddy Bridgewater, I get he's local. They could have sold that. Okay, I mean it wouldn't have been an easy sell, but it could have been. Teddy's got some upside. His career was sort of starting to take off a little bit, and then he got hurt. And he's local. He's a lifelong Dolphin fan. This is an organization that has been much better about diversity here. And you bring in a black quarterback to play for a black head coach and a black GM and a black offensive consultant and all the rest of those things. I mean, it could have been sold, I guess. I don't know how you sell Blake Bortles. I mean, you can imagine the reaction to that, what that's going to be. I mean, I guess it could be McCown. I mean, that's Chris Kaufman's prediction. It could be Fitzpatrick. But if it's Bortles, I mean, what are you going to say at that press conference? We think that, he has more,
He gives us the best chance to win.
For growth.
Yeah.
I mean, I know he went to the AFC Championship game, but, I mean, he was not the reason for it. He had one game in the playoffs that was terrific, but Ryan had really good games. I mean, you can have really good games, but can you have really good games consistently? So I guess to put a bow on this, I just think, as we look at it, it's good that the Dolphin fans can move on now and know, because I was starting to see some of this on Twitter, like, would you bring Ryan back? Like, no, that's enough. Okay, it's enough. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, that would have been the worst possible outcome.
And for me, my prediction, it'll be a rookie. I think they'll draft someone not in the first round, because I don't think any of the first-round guys you'd want are going to be there. But I think someone post-first round that you give a chance to start on opening day, and maybe he's Russell Wilson, and maybe he's Cody Kessler. He's gone in a year, and you find your guy in 2020. I think a rookie will start a quarterback for the Dolphins in 2019, with the hopes of maybe getting someone better in 2020. More on that, obviously, as free agency rolls along. If the Dolphins make any signings or if any major things happen, you'll hear it from us here on the 5 Reasons Sports Podcast. You can then check out 3 Yards Per Carry as well, covering all the same things. And thanks for listening to the emergency edition of the 5 Reasons Sports Podcast.